Good morning. Welcome back to Taylor Time Live. I'm your host, Seth Gladden, and today we'll be continuing our series on the sticky truth, the science of selling adhesives. So we've already had part 1 and part 2. Today we'll be continuing with part 3. But in case you missed those, you can go back and check them out on YouTube. They're on our Taylor Time Live channel. So just check out the live channel and you can find those. Sticky Truth, part 1 and 2. Part 1, we talked about the history of adhesives. We covered through briefly the history of adhesives. We covered through some of the types of adhesives. So if you're curious about the difference between a latex and acrylic, urethane, epoxy, hybrid silane, we talked about all of those. So some great information there. And then we also covered some chemistry terms like elastomeric, cross-linking, isocyanates, and VOCs. So a lot of information in part 1. So again, check that out. That's the Sticky Truth, part 1. Then we moved on to part 2 last month. That's where we covered time. So we talked about flash time, open time, working time, dry time, cure time, pot life, and acclimation. So a lot of times that we took a look at there, but there are some differences that you may be interested in, as well as we looked at the different sets, the different types of sets that adhesives can have. So we looked at what's the difference between a wet set, semi-wet set, a dry set, and then we transitioned into even soft set, like a PSA, firm set, and hard set adhesives. When to use what to look for, what to know about them. So a lot of good information. And then we had just started talking about traffic when we ran out of time. But Shelley Ackerman has been with us for part 1 and 2, and she's back in part 3. Unfortunately not in studio, but she is remote again. So Shelley, thank you so much for joining again.
Thank you for having me, Seth. You could say that I got caught up in traffic, maybe?
Oh, yes, that's true. Yeah. Drum roll, or I guess not. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us again. So, Shelley, like I just said, we had just started talking about traffic, and obviously in traffic we're concerned with light traffic, heavy traffic, and heavy rolling loads. Again, if you're new to the series, you're jumping in the middle, so go ahead and watch this one, but then catch up. But what we're discussing is things that relate to flooring adhesives, right? And why you need to know these things and how it's going to help you be more successful when you're talking to clients or selling adhesives. Traffic time can be a huge differentiator, and so really knowing the difference between that and when an adhesive or flooring manufacturer says allow this much time before light traffic, this much time before heavy traffic, and then some adhesives don't even allow rolling loads. But let's talk about that, Shelley. So we talked about light last time, but give us a brief recap of that, and then we'll talk about the other two.
Sure. I think this is probably a good transition point. So you think of light traffic. I mean, obviously the literal sense is, there's not a lot of traffic on the road, but what does that mean with a flooring installation or when it comes to adhesives? That just means that you finish the installation, you're waiting for that adhesive to start kind of working its magic and doing the cross-linking that it's intended to, but you also know that there's going to be some activities that are taking place on top of that floor. Maybe some other trades are going to be on the floor, or just even working your way back out of a particular space. That would be considered light traffic.
Yeah.
The key to light traffic, too, is that's also the most critical point when products, especially modular products, you could get a little bit of shifting during that open time or that light traffic time. So that's where you need to be really careful because that adhesive is still really in its wetter state. So light traffic and protecting that installation from light traffic is going to be key.
Yeah, and really I think when it comes to selling these too, Shelley, like you were saying, that knowing the times that is, so you'll have an adhesive that maybe doesn't allow light traffic on it for 12 hours, right? And really what that means is no one should be in that space. Whereas if you have an adhesive that says you can have light traffic on it immediately after installation, that's a huge difference. So you look at a home, right, where you're looking at a difference of maybe a 24-hour, if you're installing like hardwood, maybe 24-hour light traffic with some products versus like a 6-hour with others. So if you're telling a homeowner 24 hours light traffic, that means you're staying in a hotel, right? Whereas if it's 6 hours, if it's 6 hours, you can have the installers come in the morning, they install, and you can be back, in your home doing normal things later that day. So really, I think
it's always also It's critical too to make sure that that floor is properly protected, whether we're talking any kind of traffic. So let's go back to your example with the homeowner. If they've just installed a new hardwood floor or even an LVT floor, and they're going to roll in a new refrigerator or a new stove. Flooring protection is the key to make sure that those products don't shift or don't move around, or that adhesive doesn't become too displaced underneath that rolling load. So that's where that time does become critical, Seth.
Yeah, well, and I think you just took us right from light traffic to the next one. So let's just go there. So let's look at heavy traffic and heavy rolling loads, because you just mentioned a couple great points. So what is the main difference if I was talking to someone trying to explain what's the main difference between light traffic and heavy traffic? How would you explain that?
Absolutely. So heavy traffic, again, is going to be when a space is in use. Let's go to a commercial example. Maybe it's a classroom, where that classroom is going to start to be outfitted with some new desks and chairs and maybe even having some people on it. Again, that's what we would call a moderate or a heavy traffic scenario. Corridors, again, that's where you're going to find the most serviceable use for that space would be under heavy traffic.
Right. Yeah, and so back to the homeowner, right? If you're on a hardwood floor and you said like rolling a stove or an oven, most hardwood flooring adhesives don't come with a heavy rolling load time, because for most definitions of heavy rolling loads, you shouldn't have those on a hardwood floor, right? But getting a fridge or like you said, an oven or something like that in, really you're gonna kind of rely on that heavy traffic time probably, right?
You are always going to protect that floor, bottom line too.
For sure. So let's talk quickly about heavy rolling loads, because I think, especially when I first came into the industry, I heard heavy rolling loads and hospital beds, right? And like that's the one thing I kind of heard. But what else kind of falls in that heavy rolling load category?
There are so many examples. You mentioned the one with hospital beds. You think about, a hospital bed that has, a weight of its own, and you put a patient on top of it, and then you get a very narrow profile of a wheel. That becomes a very significant point load. But outside of those examples, some other things that you may not think of in retail settings. If you're moving heavy shelving, there's some really cool shelving movers that allow you to relocate fully loaded shelving out of the way while you install a floor, and then you put it right back. So that also helps with the speed of resets on the retail segment. That would be a heavy rolling load. Pallet jacks. There's a lot of retailers, big box retailers, that will use a pallet jack to move inventory and material around. So those are probably the worst examples of heavy rolling loads. And then there's others that could just be as simple as a shopping cart loaded with some dog food. Yeah, that would be a heavy rolling load.
So really, the point here for selling the adhesive, right, and knowing the difference is, if you're talking to a customer, let's take you mentioned it, a grocery store, right? Or like a Target or Walmart, and you're trying to talk to someone about their retail or grocery store space, and you're trying to sell them an adhesive that has a heavy rolling load time of 48 hours versus a different product that maybe allows heavy rolling loads on in as little as maybe 12 hours. That's a huge differential, right? Because to your point, you can't move those loaded shelves back onto that floor even though you're done installing. If it's 48 hours, that's 2 days. So now you've disrupted the flow of your store, your customers can't access that merchandise, you're losing out on sales. So sometimes by choosing a product that's more expensive but has a quicker heavy rolling load time, you may end up saving your customer a ton of money, right? So I think that's the beauty of really... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing to point out too is not all adhesives are created equal either. I mean, you'll have adhesives that are maybe a softer set that can't handle heavy rolling loads. So it's also maybe another reason to go back to watch part 1 or part 2 to get into some adhesive that is a hard set adhesive, which will be more resistant to those heavy rolling loads too. So that's also very critical.
Well, and I think the last thing I would have to say on that you mentioned earlier is that point load too. A lot of people think heavy rolling loads, and it's rolling, right? It's got the term rolling in it. So like, oh yeah, they can picture a hospital bed going down a corridor. But in that room where it is, that point load just sitting there 99% of the time where it's there with a patient on it, you'll get indentation, and that's something you definitely want to avoid. So make sure you've got the right adhesive. Again, like Shelley said, go back and check out the other parts. But you do want to make sure you've got the right adhesive, but you also give it the amount of time to cure up and have the strength to be ready to receive that. So, well, I think that gives us a pretty good overview of the difference in traffics. Let's talk about sound a little bit. So in sound, there's kind of three main units of measure that everyone looks for, right? And that's IIC, STC, and delta IIC. So talk to us a little bit. Let's actually start with STC. I know I said those in a different order, but what is STC?
Right. I followed along. STC sounds like a pretty cool band name, but it's actually right. Sound transmission class. So this is, you think about a space where people are gathering, people are speaking, maybe there's some music playing. It's just the ambient sound in the room. So if you're thinking of a multifamily space or an apartment building, your neighbor's having a Post Malone dance party, that's a pretty significant sound transmission class when some of those frequencies and sounds can transfer over to other spaces. Why it's important in adhesives or with a flooring assembly. Again, I think a lot of that comes down to multifamily spaces where you're protecting all of those individual living spaces from your neighbors' activities and whatever. But adhesives can contribute towards a sound transmission class, which we're going to talk to in a second, with the IIC and the delta IIC. But again, the higher the STC number, the better sound insulation you have with a flooring assembly.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, dance party, right? So a dance party will have both the music, like you said, the ambient, as well as the IIC probably, right? Because people are dancing.
Yeah.
So what is IIC? What does that mean? And what are we looking for there?
So IIC, impact insulation class, or can also be impact isolation class, IIC, but I stands for impact. So you think of people dancing, dropping a can of beans from counter heights, and that impact sound. What happens when it hits that?
How often do you drop a can of beans?
I don't know. Not very often.
I don't know when the last time I dropped a can of beans was, but I get the idea. So,
okay.
And you said multifamily, but really too, this is critical in hospitality too, right? Like hotels, sure. And honestly, they're looking for, I think, like Hilton and Marriott for sure. Most of the hotel chains have their specific numbers that they're looking for, right? Whether it's 50 or 55. So they are wanting a specific number, and so they're looking for an assembly to meet that. So that's why, really when you're selling an adhesive, it's great to know not only what these different things, STC, IIC, delta IIC, we'll talk about that one in a second, what they mean, but what they actually can do for you, the power of that number, of that assembly in the real world, right?
Right,
so
and how that adhesive can contribute to that. Yeah, to your point, Seth, the last thing, there's nothing more annoying than being in a hotel and, hearing someone above you or below you drop, well, it wouldn't be a can of beans, but drop an appliance or something, like a hair product on the floor in the middle of the night.
Or people like you that have huge dogs, if you lived in an apartment and had your Great Dane in there running around, that gets a little old after a while. So
unless it's my dog. It never gets old.
Exactly. Let's talk about delta IIC a little bit, and then we've got just some fun facts on kind of how those are rated and what that kind of translates to. But what's the difference between IIC and delta IIC?
So delta obviously is a rate of change. So it's the contributing change that a product or an adhesive or the assembly will have in creating that overall performance. You think of, again, adhesives contributing to the impact insulation class. I know, Seth, I think you pulled up some fun random facts to just kind of put that in perspective of why it really matters and how adhesives can contribute to some of the better sound insulating in class. So what were some of those fun facts you pulled up?
Yeah. So, an important thing to think about and realize when you're talking about sound, it's measured much in the same way pH is. So it's a logarithmic scale. So a lot of people, when they hear for example, normal breathing is typically 10 decibels, right? So decibel is that unit of measure, and the decibel scale is that logarithmic. So a normal breathing is 10, and a ticking watch is 20. And people will go, well, that must be a loud breather or a quiet watch, right? But when you think about it, it's not double. 10 to 20 doesn't mean it's double. It means it's 10 times. So a ticking watch is 10 times louder than normal breathing, right? You get to a soft whisper, that's 30 decibels. Things like a washing machine or dishwasher running can be as high as 70 decibels. Common city traffic, even sitting inside your car, is 80 or 85. So again, as you go up that scale and then you get to a concert, which is usually around 100, 105, a decibel rating of 100, get ready for this, Shelley, is 1 billion times more powerful than a decibel rating of 10. So a concert, the difference between a typical concert and someone breathing is 1 billion times more intense on that decibel rating scale. So it's a lot of power that comes with that, and that's why it gets so annoying so quickly, right? You hit that pivot point where it's like from a washing machine at 70 to a concert at 100. It's a huge difference, right?
If you're at a concert and you're annoyed, you're not at the right concert.
Okay, I mean, that's valid, but also hearing loss is a thing, so maybe step back from the speakers for a minute. But no, it really is. I think that's, it is some fun facts, but it's so important for salespeople in the flooring world to know, and to know that not only can their flooring contribute, but adhesives, there are adhesives that can contribute to that as well, and some of them do a lot better job than others. Some of it is the thickness, some of it is the density. So there's a lot of factors that play into that and how that whole assembly comes together. So,
and I think it's also important to point out that a flooring product or an adhesive product is never going to give you what you're looking for by itself singularly. So it again becomes part of that assembly. And I will say that resilient products are obviously never going to perform, or very rarely will they perform as well as a soft surface product for an impact insulation or even STC product, because obviously those soft surfaces absorb sound. And if you've ever been to a loud restaurant where there's nothing but hard surfaces, you definitely understand that. So even
for sure,
a nice layer of adhesive with a resilient product, it's not going to get you what you need.
Yeah. Yep. So know your products and check out those numbers, but oftentimes it requires specific testing for each assembly too, for that reason, because there's so many variables. So
absolutely, and it should be noted that testing is really expensive as well. It's very precise.
It is.
It takes a lot of time. So any manufacturer that can give you those Delta IIC ratings, obviously they've done their due diligence and spent the money to have their products tested.
Yep. That's a good point. So let's transition gears a little bit. Let's talk about inventory, right? So anytime that you're dealing with adhesives, whether it's a distributor or really anyone that touches it all the way from the time it's manufactured until it's installed, it's going to be considered inventory, right? So when we look at that, we've got a few different terms, but let's start with rotation. So we actually have a tip on this. Taylor Time tip, I believe. So if you want the short version of just this one thing, you can check it out there. But why is it so important to rotate inventory?
Well, it's important to rotate inventory because products have a shelf life or a date of expiration or a date of manufacture. And depending on the product, it could be 1 year and it could be 2 years. Let's go back to my bean example. There would be an expiration date on any of your products, but you always want to put your older products to the front of your shelves if you're a distributor. If you're a flooring contractor, maybe you've got some leftover product that you brought back to your warehouse that you want to repurpose and put on another job. obviously use your older inventory first. So, first products in, go to the back, older products come to the front, rotate your inventory, and also understand your date codes as well from your manufacturers. And they're all going to be different, but they all will be on either a label or on the unit in some place.
Yeah. Well, and so just like you said, that date stamp is going to tell you when it was manufactured, right? And then that's going to get you to what you just mentioned, shelf life. And we'll talk about why that's important too. But rotating that, knowing when these products are going to go, and then getting those out the door first is super important. Let's take a look at shelf life though, because you'll see different products that have all sorts of different shelf lives, and it can be a little confusing. In the adhesive world, there's probably a lot less. Maybe there's some that are 6 months up to a couple of years, but why does shelf life matter? You talked about it some in rotation, but what's your
sorry
thought
for
with
kind of
shelf
stealing the thunder. Yeah, absolutely. So shelf life, as you mentioned, could be 6 months, which would probably be more of an anomaly, but usually 1 year or up to 2 years would be an average life of a flooring product or flooring adhesive. Doesn't mean that product is going to spontaneously combust or change, but what may happen is the chemistry of that product may start losing some of its efficacy over time. It may have a funky odor, change color. So you just want to make sure that, again, you're using those products within that period of time. And, just because a product that may be at its 1 year or 2 year expiration date does not mean that product isn't any good. I'm sure all manufacturers can give you some sort of technical guidance and give you some key things to look out for. But why that matters, again, is your chemistry may weaken. And that's why you're buying premium adhesives and paying for those adhesives, is you want that chemistry to help you with all those things we talked about with, heavy traffic, rolling loads, all of those things.
Yeah. Well, and if we look at extremes, and we'll talk about freeze thaw in a minute here, as well as warranties, and they all kind of tie together, right? All four of these things that we're talking about. But the other thing with shelf life, I think that's possibly overlooked, but should never be, is take a look at the temperature ranges or humidity ranges that are required for storage too, right? Like if you look at a medication, a lot of times they'll say like store in a cool, dry place, right? Or dark even sometimes. Like they're dictating how to store that to make sure that it's viable. And if you look at the same thing, throwing it in a shipping container out on a warehouse yard and leaving it for 2 years just because it says 2 years, that's not inside the shelf life, right? So be aware of your temperature ranges and your humidity ranges if they apply, especially when it comes to adhesives and coatings, because they can be sensitive to that, right?
Absolutely.
Which leads us directly into freeze thaw. So let's talk about that.
It does. Yeah. And, again, I think you said it very well. Last thing you want to do is put a product, whether it's an adhesive or even a finished flooring product, in a storage container in a parking lot in the dead of summer for it to just kind of bake almost like it's in an oven. Contrast that to freeze thaw. You're thinking about maybe you're receiving a pallet of adhesives and it has to sit outside on a loading dock. Maybe somebody forgets about it over the weekend. Adhesives have stabilizers in them that, for the most part, will protect them to some degree from freeze-thaw cycles. But you do need to be aware of the temperature extremes. Some may only go to freezing. Some can go to, negative numbers. But how many cycles also does it allow? Some adhesives, right, you could be subjected to maybe 3 cycles of that before the product is deemed worthless, or you've lost a lot of that chemistry. So that's where your freeze-thaw cycles come into play.
Yeah. Well, and there are some products, because we make some on both sides of the fence, right? Some of them that say protect from freezing, some of them that say they're stable to 3 or 5 cycles of freeze-thaw, right? So right, always check documentation. Tech data sheets are a great place to start. You can always call, any manufacturer. If you call them, they'll be more than happy to tell you what that product's capable of and how to store it, because that's going to ensure the best outcome for your installation. So speaking of the best outcome for your installation, let's talk about warranties, Shelley, and why those are so important in the world of adhesives.
Absolutely. So, no one likes claims. Everybody wants their floors to perform, and obviously adhesives are an integral part of that. So, your warranties are going to vary by your manufacturer and the manufacturer's language. If you're ever questioning a job site or an installation or something just doesn't feel right, and you're working with a manufacturer on the warranty, some of the things that we've just talked about, the manufacturer is going to ask, like, how have you handled that product? What was the shelf life, or what was the expiration date on that product? Did you rotate your inventory? But all of your warranties are, for the most part, they're performance-based warranties, saying that we promise you that these products will perform if you follow our installation recommendations, requirements, handle the material properly, install it the way that you should, and then the manufacturer's warranty will kick in. And I will say not all manufacturers' warranties are created equal. So if you're specifying an adhesive, I would actually pay attention to what the manufacturer warrants as far as if there is a problem. Some manufacturers will only warranty their adhesive if there is a confirmed adhesive failure, which, that doesn't certainly get you very far when you're talking about, an entire installation. So manufacturers' warranties are very important.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like you said, they're not all created equal, right? And that's so true, because you look at some products, they may only carry like a 1-year limited liability, right, warranty that just says, if this product is found to be defective, we'll replace it with new product, right? Versus you have other warranties that are more of a comprehensive or performance, like a top-down, so to speak. There's a lot of terms that people use, but it's important to know what exactly does that warranty cover. Because if you have a 1-year performance or a limited liability, you can even have a depreciating liability warranty, right? Where they say lifetime warranty, but if you're 20 years into it and it fails, oh, well, it depreciated out, 20 years worth, so we're only going to compensate you, whatever. So there's such a drastic difference when it comes to warranties. And I think that's something that sometimes gets overlooked, but should never be overlooked, because really the way a manufacturer stands behind, and this is true of adhesives, of flooring products, everything that you're going to use from top to bottom for a flooring installation, know your warranties, because that's really what's going to protect you, but also give you the confidence that that product's probably going to work in the first place if they're confident enough to back it with a strong warranty. So check those out. That leads us to substrates, right? So let's talk a little bit about this. We've only got a few minutes left, but I think we can get through these next three: porous, non-porous, and CSP, or concrete surface profile. So let's start with porous substrates. And what's the difference between porous and non-porous?
Seems, again, very self-explanatory, kind of like traffic. But a porous substrate is obviously going to be a surface that allows an absorption of moisture. A very easy way for you to tell. Some people can tell by looking, if that slab has a little bit of a profile or aggressiveness to it, and could be considered porous. But there's actually a water droplet test. And I think there's actually another Taylor Time tip that we filmed as well with the water droplet test.
Yep, so that's ASTM F3191, right? And so that's the water drop test, which is actually now, as of this year, hard baked into ASTM F710 as well, which is kind of the gold standard, right, of how to prepare a substrate to receive flooring. Even though technically ASTM F710 is for resilient flooring, it's the gold standard across the board for most types of flooring installations. So be aware of that, because ASTM F710 now does require you to perform a water droplet test, which is the ASTM F3191. And that will tell you, it's a simple 1-minute test, right? You just drop water on the surface. If it absorbs, it's porous. If it doesn't, non-porous, right?
It's non-porous. Right, exactly.
So,
very simple test.
Where that matters for adhesives is really, it can change the trowel that you use to install with. Sometimes it could even require a different type of adhesive. Some adhesives they're not designed to work over one or the other of those types of substrates. So there's a lot that goes into the difference. Like you said, it sounds so common sense, and it is. But know the difference between them, because it can net you a vastly different result. And if you use the wrong tool and spread too much adhesive on a non-porous substrate, and then put flooring on top, that could end up in a failure. So always know that. And Shelley, I think last, let's cover CSP real quick. Actually, you know what? I think we better bump that to next time, and hopefully I can convince you to join us again. but if not, we are out of time.
I think you do that on purpose.
I do. It's going to be, but we won't call it part 4. We'll call it part 3, part 2, right?
Yeah.
Part 3, verse 2. So anyway, that is all the time we have. But thank you so much for joining us again, Shelley.
Thanks for a fun morning, Seth. I appreciate it.
Of course. Just remember, if you haven't checked us out yet, go join us, follow us on social media, see what we're up to there. Check out our website. We have a great app. You can Google that in the Google Play Store, or you can get it in the Apple App Store. Just Taylor Adhesives, and you'll find us there. You can get the app. And tune in every third Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. for Taylor Time Live. Check out our tips. And remember, at Taylor Adhesives, if I can say that again, let me try it. At Taylor Adhesives, we're with you every step.